Hello again, friends, and welcome to another episode of Culture Crossroads. I'm Andrew Southwick. He is R.C. Williams. She is Julianna Ormond. And we thank you for being with us on this episode. My friends, R.C. and Julianna, just real quickly, man, how are you guys doing? It's been a crazy week. No shortage of news, which we're going to cover here on this program. But how are you? You keeping your heads above water?
We certainly are, Andrew. You know, in the business of market research and behavioral marketing, never a slow news day, especially now.
Keeps us on our toes.
No kidding. All right. Let me set this up for you, and then I want to get your response. And you guys are hearing this for the first time, at least from my mouth to you. So I want to get your cold response from this. Let's see what you guys have to say. Now, no doubt, by now you've heard at least the echoes of many of the diehard globalist and progressive crying tears of woe and lamentation as President Donald Trump and the Doge team puts an end to USAID. Now, USAID, of course, is a program that's set up on the surface to provide humanitarian aid to foreign countries. And USAID boasts of supporting medical programs in impoverished cities, clean water and well-building initiatives, the building of buildings, facilities, and so on. Now, according to Forbes, I'm going to scroll across the screen for you a partial list of the non-government organizations or NGOs that have received money through USAID. You can see some of them here. The Catholic Relief Services, $4.6 billion to Catholic Relief Services. Chemonics International is $4.5 billion. FHI 360, you can see several here. You also see RTI International, $2.3 billion. That's a research institute. John Snow International, $1.8 billion. Save the Children Federation. I'm going over these for a reason because these all seem legitimate. Down here, here's one that might be known to many Christians. How about World Vision? We know them about sending money to adopt children. They've received more than $1 billion. Mercy Corps has received more than $1 billion, and so on. Now, as you see these organizations, as they scroll on the screen, you're going to note that this list is a combination of both faith-based and non-faith-based companies. And if you're to look up any of these organizations, you'll see very similar verbiage describing what they do. All their websites say effectively that they're all dedicated to making a more livable world, to making a better world, harnessing diversity, eradicating disease, and the like. So again, on the surface, you might think that the outrage, even though it's from progressive globalists for the most part, over the end or the perceived end of USAID is justified. Now, in a recent article published on Christianity Today, missionary Dr. Matthew Loftus stated the following, quote, "The total closure of USAID would cause irreparable damage to a number of Christian mission institutions across Africa, and I'm sure across the world. A lot of what USAID is funding is critical infrastructure that everyone relies on to keep their programs running every day, like medicines. But all is not as it seems. Here is a list of more programs and initiatives funded through USAID. According to KUTV and KUTV.com, $50 million to fund condoms in Gaza, $1.5 million to advance DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 on a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for transgender comics and comic books in Peru. Another $37 million to the World Health Organization. You know they need the money. $16 million in funding for institutional contractors for gender development offices. $4 million of funding for the Center for Climate Positive Development. Another $12 million for the Bureau for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security. $6 million in non-emergency funding for redundant administrative supports, $3 million in non-emergency funding to provide evaluation services for planning and learning programs, and $600,000 for family planning, which means abortion, in Latin America. Now, does any of that sound like critical infrastructure? Again, from Christianity Today, quote, "Here's how USAID projects work. USAID staffers outline a need like the lack of water in a community, and a solution like building a well, and form that into a project. An organization faith-based, secular, for-profit, or nonprofit, applies to implement that project. Project-based funding, then, is where most U.S. foreign assistance goes. So the stop work order on these foreign assistance programs halted their efforts. Now, even if the administrator, the quote goes on, even if the administrator of a project is not religious, a local church or religious organization might be implementing it on the ground. USAID supports local faith-based organizations, it said on its now shuttered website, because it considers them to be, quote, the backbone of local communities, end total quote there. And so it would appear that USAID is one of likely many money laundering fronts, in my view, that our own government uses to advance progressive globalism around the world. And like any good front, some legitimate work has to be done. I mean, think of a restaurant or a dry cleaning service that might be a front for an illegal gambling operation or a drug ring, for example. USAID looks to be somewhat similar. Large sums of money are given to major corporate distributors who then give the money to various groups around the world. And in the midst of all that money transfer, the money itself becomes almost impossible to accurately account for. And it's in that blind spot where the con is able to prosper. Not to mention the fact that it is clear that many a faith-based organization and many local Christian churches around the world likely have become so dependent on USAID funding, they may not exist without it. And that is the most devious con of all. It's one thing to have slimy politicians crying foul, but it's a whole other piece of business to have churches and local church and missionary groups around the world begging on behalf of the grifting organization. What could be better press and political pressure than to try and paint the Trump administration of denying churches around the world the money they need to support their local communities, to save lives? And of course, the globalists, well, they don't mind some churches doing work here and there, especially in foreign countries that are already under their control as it is. It's a no risk. These fiends will gladly use churches as their patsies and as their front groups to keep the Green River flowing, if you catch my drift. Now, this is a story that's only beginning, and we're going to continue to follow it on this show and bring you updates as we can and as we can confirm them. But as it stands now, we are seeing not just waste, fraud, and abuse, as we hear all the time, but we're also getting a look under the hood as to how the political money engines work. We are seeing how these entities use well-meaning, even servant-hearted people and groups to cover up their sinister intentions and deeds. And this should give us great pause and concern, because I'm sure that we all suspect that if we really looked under the hood of our own programs, think of Social Security, maybe Medicare, Medicaid, or any number of America's government-backed entitlements, that we would find the exact same kind of grift. Joining me now with reaction, R.C. Williams and Julianna Ormond of Watchmen. Action. Friends, what do you make of this tip of the iceberg fraudulent debacle, so to speak?
So I just want to say that I'm sitting here, my blood is boiling. Like, I read everything that you just said, but hearing it actually said in my ear, like, just is angering me, because I'm sitting here going, the systemic abuse that we're having in our society, all that money going elsewhere, when we've got all this stuff happening at home, that they were funneling the money to other places, when we've got what we are looking at on our streets. Everything that we're looking at is controlled. It is intentional. And if it can intentionally be this way ugly, it could be intentionally the way that Father says that it's supposed to look like, because our society is not the way Father wants us to have. And the money that was being sent over, no.
Andrew, I guess we were in the wrong soup line, because Politico apparently got over $8 million for their media outlet. Meanwhile, here on the Culture Crossroads, we're actually doing the work. Andrew, this is sad, but it's the grift that keeps on grifting, as the saying goes. I'll give people a microcosm of what they're hearing about USAID and what I learned at my time running a media outlet in Minnesota, which is the world capital of nonprofits. What you do if you want to properly grift is you create a nonprofit that does absolutely nothing. You appoint yourself executive director. You go get a grant for, say, $200,000 to save the orange three-toed sloth that only spawns in the winter. You then put on one event that draws no people. You give yourself enough of a salary and a small overhead for an assistant and a virtual office, and then you do it year after year. Congratulations, you're now a six-figure earner and pay no taxes. That is a micro version of how USAID has ran, and wherever they need to funnel that money, which according to the money they gave to Politico, also includes weaponizing news and information against U.S. citizens. Hat tip to the Smith-Mundt Act being weakened by the Obama administration. The chickens have come home to roost.
And you think about how demonized conservatives are for wanting to cut back on entitlements, for example, and we're told that we can't afford to pay for all these life-saving things, or we can't afford to eradicate hunger in America. Meanwhile, we're funneling all of our money away. We're giving it away for the worst, for some of the worst possible reasons, but really all for the same reason. It's the collapse into government control, is it not?
It is. I mean, who does not want to see the Irish transgender musical? For goodness sake. But in all seriousness, Andrew, it is. And what happens is that it becomes incredibly dangerous. So when you do money or give away money, we have a nonprofit foundation. There are some very particular things that you're supposed to do, in particular with project money. And what gets dangerous, what you mentioned a moment ago about the different paths that money goes down that makes it untraceable, it is very hard to determine how much of these resources are being weaponized against U.S. citizens. That's a real danger, Andrew, which is why all the controls are in place and supposed to be used in the first place. It's nice to actually see all of this at least taking a step towards being cleaned up.
So they weaponize our money and they're using that money against us, the people, instead of helping the people. That's our money.
Yep.
Well, what do you think that's going to do when they are promoting all these DEI progressive policy initiatives around the world? Does that not serve as even part of a war against the West? Because those are the same initiatives that are being weaponized here in America. And you mentioned RC Politico, and they weren't able to make payroll. I mean, that just came out just before we came on to do the broadcast here. They weren't able to make payroll, which then causes people and the eyebrows to raise. How much were they getting from USAID? And then again, what about other laundering fronts and so on and so forth? Do we have, how much of our mechanism then are we spending, or I would say paying for our own destruction? I'll give you guys the last word.
Well, I'm going to say that it's my money. And then when you take away my ability to vote with my money, you're taking away my ability to say, no, we don't want a Politico. We, the people, are not putting money towards it for an obvious reason. Therefore, why should our government be giving them our money? We obviously do not want Politico. Otherwise, they'd be able to make payroll.